Good morning and welcome to the Monday Call brought to you by NZ Funds. What happens when an influential Silicon Valley investor turns his attention to New Zealand? Rob Coneybeer, co-founder at Shasta Ventures, has backed iconic companies like Nest, Dollar Shave Club, Canva and Anaplan, helping them grow into global successes. Now he's bringing that experience and insight to New Zealand, exploring how the country can attract talent, capital and opportunity. Rob, it is a delight to have you here. Welcome. I thought we should start with your beginning and your time in New Zealand. What drew you to come here in the first place, and what led you to staying here?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on your show. Really appreciate it. It's a real honor to be here. And as far as New Zealand, where it started was, to be honest, it was pursuit of endless summer. And it was shortly after I'd moved to Seattle and started to discover both how great a Seattle summer is and how terrible a Seattle winter is. Started thinking about where I would want to spend my winters. And at the same time, an entrepreneur that we had backed, Aaron Patzer, had founded a company called Mint.com, sold it to Intuit. And that was one of our first exits with Shasta Ventures. And about a year after he sold the company to Intuit, he moved to New Zealand. And I remember thinking at that time, that's really interesting. And about 10 years ago, I came down and visited him regarding a new company that he was starting at the time remotely from New Zealand. And at the time, the startup ecosystem was much more nascent than it is today, but filed it in the back of my mind. So came down again a couple times to New Zealand on vacation, on holiday with family, and really enjoyed my time here. Had a week over the summer holidays a couple of years ago where I worked remotely from up near Whangarei and loved it. And when I started thinking about endless summer, New Zealand was first on the list.
Fantastic. How did you make the decision to stay? Was it sort of incremental where you were like, I just can't keep going back to winters? Or was there a moment in time and you're like, I'm now committed?
Yeah, I think the thing that really surprised me is I started looking at New Zealand with the idea of endless summer, but very quickly found that the startup ecosystem was growing very rapidly and came across a company called Lavia that's down in Tauranga. And we ended up investing because we liked the metrics. We could see it building a global company. And that was the moment at which I started to really think about, that's interesting. You can actually build big, interesting companies here. And at that time, started to look more deeply at the startup ecosystem. And over about a 2-year period after that, 3-year period after that, looked at a ton of companies. And through Shasta, we ended up investing in Dawn Aerospace, Tracksuit, Aurora, Vesiv, Portainer, Zeno, Partly, and several other companies. And the reason that we invested in these companies was because we felt that they had the chance to become very significant global companies, not just interesting New Zealand companies.
We will be digging into your, philosophy in investing a little bit, and the opportunity from New Zealand to go global a little bit later on. But before that, you didn't launch Shasta for the endless summers. What led you to even moving into venture capital? And tell us a little bit about your story before you came to that point.
Yeah, how did you end up in Seattle?
Oh yeah, no, I love Seattle.
It's not the coffee because it's Starbucks.
Well, one of the things that is very important about Washington State, or historically has been very important about Washington State, is for people that aren't familiar with the tax structure in the U.S., Washington State has a much lower tax environment. And about 6 years ago, when we started to have some big exits and was thinking about where do I want to live, what do I want to do, there are some real advantages to being in a state that's a no tax, low tax environment. And it's something that really helped grow the Seattle economy over time. I think it's no accident that Amazon and Microsoft and other multi-trillion-dollar companies were founded there. But as far as starting Shasta, I'd been interested in venture capital for a very long time. And I'm trained as an engineer, undergrad, University of Virginia, grad school, Georgia Tech for a master's in mechanical engineering. Then I worked in the space industry for a couple of times, went back to business school. And then coming out of business school, I went straight into joining a firm called New Enterprise Associates, became an associate there, worked my way up to general partner there, was there for about 6 or 7 years. And it was during the first big dot-com boom where people really could see the rise of the internet.
So is this sort of 98, 99?
Yeah. So I joined in 96.
Oh, right. So
I was there through that
time.
wave, and I was there until about 2003, 2004. And loved NEA, learned a lot there. It's absolutely a leading firm, but it was growing a lot, and I wanted to work in an environment that was focused on early stage companies. So I left NEA and teamed up with a couple other people, and we founded Shasta Ventures. And in 2005, we raised our first fund, which was a $210 million US dollar fund focused on investing in early stage IT across 3 different areas. One was new technology areas. So if you think, people call it deep tech now, but if you were to think of hardware, new business models, et cetera, consumer, so direct to consumer and other types of consumer, and also traditional software and SaaS as it started to develop in that time frame.
How did you choose those verticals? Is that a function of your background beforehand, or was it something that skills you brought as a group? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Fundamentally, what happened was the 3 founders that came together, we came together as equal partners, and we wanted to focus on early stage investing. And our view was there are these sectors, but they all overlap in that the future of technology. And this is now a very accepted idea, but at the time we thought of it as the consumerization of technology. So even if you're working in enterprise and you have big enterprise software for accounting or for different sales processes or all these different things that people know of with SaaS today, it should be really fun to use software. It should be easy to use software. It should be products that people love interacting with. And those were the companies in general, the enterprise companies that started to really work are the ones that actually users were delighted to use, as opposed to ones that were just automating tasks. They were actually relatively fun to use. So as we thought about that, or we thought about new technology areas, which was what I focused on, when you look at a company like Nest, what Nest did and what Tony Fadell and Matt Rogers did was they looked at a really crappy product that is out there, this white plastic hunk of crap that's on the wall to control your thermostat, and nobody knows how to program it. Everybody throws the manual away, so nobody would use it. And they looked at it and they said, how do we make that a user-friendly sort of device? And they created this thing that looked like a little round dial. And if you were cold, you turn the temperature up. If you were hot, you turn the temperature down. You'd hear a little clicking noise, and then it would set its own schedule based on that. It was actually one of the first consumer applications of AI, as it turns out, this product. And the first year, I think they shipped something like $70 million worth of thermostats. And then they went to, I forget what the numbers were, but I think it went to like 200 million the next year, and it grew really fast. But that's an example. Another example is a company called Turo that's actually available in Australia. It'll be coming to New Zealand at some point, but Turo is Airbnb for cars. And it's a company that's doing around...
That's in California, isn't it? We used it.
It is.
Yeah. We used it. It's amazing.
Yeah. You can rent anything you want.
We were talking about we really want a Jeep Wrangler with a soft top.
Right.
You can get it, and it's parked at the airport. Yeah. Wherever some street off the airport. You can go get it. Yeah. It's
Airbnb for cars.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And they're doing around $1 billion USD a year in turnover. It's profitable. It's growing. It's become an interesting company. But what set Turo apart early on was having a great user experience, a great consumer experience, something that people like. So when you ask the question about what was the common thread between these, it's products that delight people like to use. It's a very consumer user centric sort of mentality. Now that's kind of accepted wisdom in terms of what people expect. But back in 2005, 2006, that was a relatively new idea.
If that was the sort of idea and product mantra you had. How did you think about it? And I'm really interested maybe in your first role too, when, coming up to the tech boom. From a financial point of view, what are you looking at? Are you looking at total addressable market and going, whoa? Or are you looking at, 'cause it's quite different nowadays because a lot of these tech companies have a lot of cash, but back then there was no cash and you had to raise cash, and how do you spend it, and how did you assess? Because there must have been huge amounts of ideas that you could have invested in.
Well, one of the interesting things is there's a ratcheting mechanism. So what seems today like a crazy amount of money, I mean, it would have seemed insane before, but in 99 and 2000, people could not believe all the money that was available. And then kind of the same thing happened. So it was just this ratcheting mechanism. And I've noticed for decades, people look at what's happening, people complain about how overheated it is, but then the reality is the market's become far bigger than anybody would expect. And take a look at what's happening with NVIDIA and what's happened with NVIDIA. Nobody would have thought that that would become a multi-trillion-dollar company, the most valuable company in the world, just
very quickly,
3-4 years ago.
After with three guys catching up in Denny's restaurants in Minnesota
yeah.
or wherever.
Yeah,
so, go there after this.
And NVIDIA is one of those, people think of it as an overnight success, but it's been around for a very long time. But it turned out to be in exactly the right location. But one of the things that I like to say about Silicon Valley is, and this is a very American thing, which is anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And there's this mentality that people have, even in Silicon Valley. They say, why are there 100 people building AI startups? Why are there, 30 different hard drive startups? Why are there 30 different PC startups, et cetera? And that's what's so beautiful about the free market, is that there's not that government central planning about what to do and who the winners are going to be. And I think that's a big part of ultimately what has held like India and other places in the world back, is that government central planning of, hey, we're going to be more efficient by doing this, as opposed to letting the free market do its thing. And when you step back and you just look at the capital allocation in general, if you look at all the money that went into, say, the 20 or 30 leading startups that were building hard drives, 20 or 30 leading startups that were building PCs, 20 or 30 leading startups doing things, and then you look at the aggregate market cap of the ultimate winner or a couple of winners, it tends to be a pretty dramatic multiple of all the money that went into it. And part of the reason that company became so valuable is because that intense competitive environment led them to need to innovate and stay ahead.
And a lot of errors get made, the creative destruction concept. A lot of businesses, and they learn from each other, try stuff, it doesn't work, and it informs the next, thing.
Yeah.
So it's not all lost. It's just decentralized, I guess. So you talked about the joy of the particular products that the businesses you invested in. What was, I guess, what was the greatest company along so far in your journey that brought you the greatest joy working with, and had the biggest impact on your business philosophy?
Yeah, I would say that the company that I'm probably proudest of is called Fetch Robotics. And it's a warehouse robotics automation solution. And we backed it when it was Melanie Wise and a couple other founders. And we put in a small amount of money in what is now called a pre-seed check. And we used to call a seed check, but now it's a pre-seed check. And it was around $1 million that we put in to help get it started. And it took a while to grow, and it was ultimately acquired by Zebra for about $350 million. Company was doing well, kind of what a lot of people would think of as bread and butter. But the companies that I get the most excited about personally are ones where I've been fortunate enough to meet the founder early at a point when they're really starting to figure it out, but before it's obvious to anybody else. There's another company that I invested in on behalf of Shasta about 2 years ago, actually about 1.5 years ago. It's called Overland, and they do high-speed off-road autonomy. So all the other companies that are doing vehicle autonomy today are on road, but they're focused on how do you move a vehicle quickly through the woods or through fields or through streams and that sort of stuff at high speed. As you might imagine, they have one major customer that they focus on right now. But it's a really interesting technology, came out of the University of Washington. But to your question of the ones that I get the most excited about, it's where it's at the earliest stages. And it's just a handful of founders that want to build something great.
I have the most beautiful segue right now, which is your special skill is finding awesome things early before everyone else does. And you're in New Zealand, so you've obviously found New Zealand. What is the I guess the thing since you've been here that you've discovered about the country in your time here that you didn't expect early on?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is how, I mean, this will sound kind of odd, is how relatively small it is. And I don't think I fully appreciated that until I'd spent several years here. And you can look at it a couple of different ways. One is you could go into one of the two major food retailers, and you see the same stuff on the shelves. And then you go back to the US and you're like, oh my God, I cannot believe how much choice there is in every single category. But here there's like, 2 or 3 different brands around it. And there's just 2 major big chains here. But when I think about it, I look at it and I think that actually can be a real asset for the country. So just backing up, the other thing that really surprised me is how well New Zealand has done for as poor as it is. And when you look at the GDP, gross domestic product per capita, it's pretty far down there in the OECD rankings. It's well behind Australia, and Australia is well behind the US. So the fact that New Zealand works as well as it does, the equivalent of the Department of Motor Vehicles, and that you can get your rego, updated, it works really well. You look at the public services, they all work really well. Low corruption, all these things. It's kind of shocking, actually, how well it works. And at the same time, New Zealand, I think, to be able to be successful going forward so that the country doesn't need to import nurses and doctors from other countries because the nurses and doctors that are trained here head to Australia or they leave for greener pastures, needs to become a wealthier country. And by that, I mean more productive. And if you take a look back at Sir Paul Callaghan, when he talked about the future of New Zealand before he passed away, I don't know, a decade ago or however long ago it was, he pointed out that you can't really get there by scaling tourism because at the end of the day, you just have more people coming on working holiday visas, and those are people that you have to support somehow. You can't do it with cheap timber. And there's all of the side effects that has ecologically of growing that cheap timber, across New Zealand. You take a look at powdered milk, you take a look at category after category. The only one that can grow and can support all the government programs that we'd love to have is the tech industry. And to do that, I think the most important thing is to bring in the talent to work side by side with talent Kiwis to be able to grow that. And when you look at the US, if you just look objectively at the US and you look at Australia as well, Australia did have the benefit of mining and minerals, but what they've done around the tech ecosystem and a lot of these services industries has been pretty magical. And in the US, you take a look at where all the trillion-dollar companies are, they're in the US tech ecosystem. So, I mean, clearly I like to get up on the soapbox about this because I'm very passionate about it. New Zealand has a major competitive advantage, which is that it's a great place to live. And you go back to how efficient really the government is and how well it does for as little taxes and economic energy there is to go around it. It's a really inviting place to live. Low corruption, safe. It may not feel like this to people that live in Auckland, but by global standards, it's pretty darn cheap to live here. So there are a lot of advantages. And the way that I like to think about it is the California dream is no longer alive in California. You have fires, you have government that incredibly high taxation, all these other things, taxes that are effectively significantly higher than they are here in New Zealand. The California dream is alive and well in New Zealand. And what I've seen and what I've found and what I'm very passionate about is the country can recruit some amazing people to come and live and work here, people that have experience to work side by side with talented Kiwis to build great companies, to build these faster. And Australia's done a great job of recruiting a lot of these folks. And I think New Zealand should be able to as well.
So if you were on your soapbox or sitting at a table next to the government, Prime Minister and Nicola Willis, the Minister of Finance and things, if they said, I agree with everything you say, because I personally agree with everything you say around we've got an educated workforce, people want to live here, and technology doesn't really care about proximity. It's not like we're a million miles away when it comes to internet traffic. So what is it that they have to do to encourage that? Because you're talking about people's one thing, but is there other things that are there quick wins that you get frustrated about that could happen quite fast to encourage that?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say, just stepping back, is I had mentioned how New Zealand's small and how that kind of surprised me. But what's interesting about it is, as a country, because it's small, the government and parliament, so whether it's government or people in opposition, you can make changes relatively easily. And the country has this huge advantage, which is to be very smart about tax policy, immigration policy, and regulatory policy. Those are three big levers. And I'm not talking about employment policy, staying out of like that, staying out of health policy, staying that. But when you look at tax, immigration, and regulatory policy, there are advantages that New Zealand can do and the government can do, and whatever government it is, to address those things in ways that are smart. So I'm not saying change the tax rate, but what I have seen the government do is take a look at the FIF tax, for example, for people that are familiar with FIF, the Foreign Investment Fund tax. Without going into the complexity of it, if you had returning Kiwis that have US green cards, and if you have US citizens that are moving to New Zealand, better or worse, the US has global taxation. There are tax treaties that the US and New Zealand have entered into and amended that are supposed to remove double taxation or like the really bad parts of it. But unfortunately, because of the way that New Zealand has this FIF tax, it's one of, I think, just a couple countries in the OECD, maybe one of two, one of three, that has this tax that if you're subject to the tax and you come in, you actually end up paying effectively double tax. And nobody wants to pay double tax. So there are ways to adjust that. And there's, as I understand it, there's legislation that's been introduced into Parliament to address this specific issue for immigrants that are coming in that are subject to double taxation. It doesn't really cost New Zealand anything because almost nobody would stay and face the double taxation. So you bring more people in to actually pay taxes here, but the government is being smart about how to credit or have alternative ways of calculating FIF so that people can take credit against the taxes that they'll ultimately owe the US. And again, that's whether you have returning Kiwi expats or people that are based in the US. So that's one easy win. And I think it's a pretty bipartisan win. Like when I've talked to people either in current government or people that are in opposition right now, they get it. They understand that this is an issue. And for me, that's part of the reason I'm very positive on New Zealand is because I think that these types of things, although slower than I would like as an American, they're actually getting addressed. And when you take a look at how they've thought about the different visa categories and things that are happening there, my sense is that the government is thoughtful about it. And again, I'm not just saying the current government. If you take a look at when the Edmund Hillary Fellowship was started years ago, et cetera, under a different coalition government, there was that experimentation and willingness to think about how do you bring in really bright, talented people here. And that is something that really excites me about the potential for a small country to do really well in attracting really great people.
I think one of the things that and maybe you have thoughts on this, one of the things that people often don't fully consider is that if you're a foreigner and you're wondering, hey, I want to do something different, I want to live in a safer place with a different tax regime, say, there is a wide selection of possible countries you could pick and that offer it. So, like it or lump it, we have to be real about the competitive element there. And there's Australia, of course, our friendly neighbour, but there's, countries, Singapore, obviously Europe's got a whole bunch. And so...
so why New Zealand over those?
So why New Zealand? You got to offer something.
Well, I mean, if somebody prefers living in Australia, I'd say you should move to Australia.
Yeah.
New Zealand, in my view, is just a much better place to live. And Australia is beautiful, but if you like that and you want to have a big market, you might as well be in California.
Yeah.
And
that's why I always thought, my wife's British and we were coming back to New Zealand and we go, well, why don't we just go to Sydney? She goes, well, why don't we just stay in London then?
I think that's exactly right.
My wife's Australian.
Yeah.
And she's always...
But I think even there, I think the country here, the ability to make positive changes in terms of setting the country up for success, I think there's much more of an opportunity to do that here than to be able to influence that in Australia, because there you have 30, 35 million people.
Do you come across with the issue that I notice it as a New Zealander, especially when I spend time, especially in the States actually, but also, the British get a hard time about being grumpy, but actually they're quite aspirational in their grumpiness. But do you get there's a lot of comments, and when you spend time overseas and come back here, there is a little bit of that scared of success, tall poppy syndrome, all that sort of thing. Do you notice that as an outsider when you first came here, that's the case, and now that you've been here for a while, it's actually not a reality? Or how do you feel about that?
I think the day-to-day reality for me in terms of what I see around tall poppy is not as evident directly. But where it shows up is when you see the headlines in the New Zealand Herald, and it talks about
there's your first problem.
Somebody you talk about somebody that did something, and they must have tricked somebody for their wealth, etc. And at the same time, they talk about the All Blacks, and isn't it just amazing that you have three brothers that have played together for years, and and so there's this admiration. And I'm talking more in like the popular consciousness of athletic success, but there's not the admiration of business success that leads to tax revenue that really pays for all the things that I think New Zealand sorely needs. And there's an efficient frontier where you're already taxing enough, where if you tax more, then you drive economic growth down. But if you bring in the right type of economic growth, you can actually grow the tax base pretty dramatically. And I think that's what needs to happen. But to the question you had about tall poppy syndrome, it's really something that you see more in terms of, I would say, a popular point of view, kind of across New Zealand. And that's where you start to include a lot of the areas that may have been left behind relative to Auckland. And that's when you get into, obviously, Invercargill, or you get into Gisborne, or you get into, Whakatane, or a lot of these places. How do you bring that along? And I think that is very important, but that's also where I think you see more tall poppy syndrome than in the major.
I know some of the guys in tracksuit, and they're anything but that. They are motivated, excited, celebrate success.
Yeah,
so there's pockets.
Well, there's this interesting thing, and it's very hard for a lot of Kiwi entrepreneurs. So Kiwi entrepreneurs have great ideas and they're willing to go and start something. But another important part of entrepreneurship is, if you're building something and you want to build a big company that matters, you should be the best in the world at something. And again, it's like, people like to think about Olympic athletes and being the best in the world. And on the athletic stage, that's something that people really admire, in New Zealand, but not so much on the business side. Although I think that's starting to happen more and more when you take a look at what's happened with Xero, what's happened with Rocket Lab. But there's another group of companies that are coming along that out of the gate, when they go to raise money internationally, they say, we are the best in the world at this. And you can say you're the best in the world at something without being arrogant, because it's true. And I think about this discussion, and I have it feels like once a week or once every couple of weeks, I'll talk to a Kiwi that's going to raise money in Silicon Valley. And they'll walk through their pitch, and I'll say, why are you the best in the world at like doing this? Like, is there anybody better than you? I'm like, no, actually, we're rather good, and we're good at it. I'm like, well, why didn't you say you're the best in the world at it? Like, well, we don't know that for sure.
We haven't sampled the whole world.
We haven't seen, yeah, we don't know it for sure. And what ends up happening when you're selling into the United States, which is the largest, most important market in general, not for every single company, but in general for Kiwi companies that have global aspirations, you have to go in and say that, because what will happen, and this is where you have to have a cultural appreciation, is no matter what you say, you're going to get discounted. So if you're going in and you're trying to do a deal at Walmart or Target or with some other big partner or some big customer, they're going to take what you said and they're going to discount it 30 to 50%. So if you go in and you say, well, we're rather good at what we do and we really punch above our weight and we're, quite okay, then people are going to say, well, they basically said they're really average or above average, but now we're going to discount it because maybe they're not. And they're going to wonder why those sales progressions aren't moving faster, despite being the best in the world at something.
I think that's why the Mowbray founders get such a hard time. And I don't know them, so I couldn't tell you anything that's fact, other than they get a hard time in the media about their wealth and dominance in certain parts of their business. But they do have the attitude of, we are the best in the world. That's right. They undoubtedly think they are, and they probably are.
They're very American that way.
Yeah,
that's for sure. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that I've heard about in the news, though, that I'm surprised it hasn't been picked up is, I'm sure you've seen the rumors, I don't know if they're true or not, about the Mowbrays buying real estate in Malibu.
I drove past that recently.
But think about just the irony in, they can buy real estate, sensitive real estate in the US, but those people, they got burned out. There's no way they'd be able to buy the same real estate in New Zealand.
Yeah. Do you know what?
It's kind of an interesting irony. I do wonder sometimes what would happen if policy-wise, the US had a policy of saying any country where a US citizen cannot buy real estate.
Can't buy it here.
You can't buy it here. What would have happened?
Do you know what New Zealand voters would say? And this is the sort of mantra that I'm anti. We were like, so?
Right.
Like, why would I want to buy property in the US?
That's exactly right.
Country in the world.
Yeah.
And blah,
yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not a patriot.
Yeah.
You're a patriot in the wrong way.
You know what? I just recently went to Ojai and I'd love to buy property there.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic.
So, in terms of the company, the mindset of Kiwis and growing businesses abroad and finding talent and building products that sell to the world, I guess, are we thinking big enough? Are the companies you're seeing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're doing a great job. They're doing a great job. This is why I'm so enthusiastic about it. Take a look at what Pete Beck has built with Rocket Lab. It is stunning.
Many would just say that's just an outlier,
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. The thing I disagree with is just, because the outliers are what define successful ecosystems. Yeah. And you're looking for the outlier. It's not just the outlier. It's that the outlier exists, and then it's what happens with the outlier. And a big part of the reason that I admire what he's built, and he can be, from, everybody I've talked to, a very difficult person, very driven. He's working very hard. Didn't have a university degree, as I understand it. He came from one of these regions that I mentioned earlier, Invercargill, but he has had something like 70 or 80 successful space launches off the North Island. Incredible. That's like the second highest or third highest private company, I think, ever has done that. Granted, they're very small rockets, but they've gone, but they have gone, in their orbital launches. That's a really, really big deal. But it's not just that, it's he's gone on for like Act 2 and Act 3. And with Act 2 and Act 3, that's going ahead and building out operations in the United States, taking on the US as a major customer to build an alternative to the Falcon 9 rocket, which is pretty unbelievable. And then the part that I think is incredibly important, is easily overlooked, is he has backed and supported people that have left Rocket Lab and have gone on to build other companies. He's served on their boards, he's invested in their companies, he's provided advice and time. He's active with the different venture funds that are based here. And that giving back, that engagement is what is so incredibly important. And the people that have come out of Rocket Lab, like if you look at Craig Piggott with what he's building with Halter, he just raised close to 200 million US dollars at $1 billion valuation. And he's incredibly aggressive, working very hard. And when you look at Levi Fawcett down at Partly and Christchurch, same thing. You take a look at Max Olson with Vesiv, founding Vesiv, this electric hydrofoiling ferry company. That is where I get the enthusiasm. And what I saw from my 23 years in Silicon Valley is that flywheel, when that gets going, that's when you can see things really happen. And then you were mentioning the founders of Tracksuit, Connor and Matt, and that team there. They are very high energy, working very hard, and they want to build a great company that has a global market from New Zealand. Like, that is something they're very focused on doing. So when companies do that, they actually find global capital. If they're the best in the world, the global capital markets, even at the early stage and the growth stage in venture capital, are incredibly competitive. So people are always looking for these opportunities, and they will find these companies.
One of the things, just back to Tall Poppy and the opportunity that I've always found interesting about venture capital and the world you live in, and it doesn't sit neatly with Kiwi's response to failure. And is you need to have, say you're a venture capital company, you might invest in 10 or 20 businesses, but you know that only one or two of them will be really successful. You don't know beforehand which one or two will be really successful, but you have to accept that the majority are probably going to be failures, and the power law. And whereas in New Zealand, unlike the US, in New Zealand, if you start a venture and you're unsuccessful, you get quite a lot of flack for that, and the media makes quite a big deal of it, of course, and rightly so at many levels. But you can contrast that with the US, where it's sort of that's the risk-taking culture, and they're more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. There's part of that I think is subtle, but it's incredibly important. Number one is, in general, people in the US that are successful with these larger companies, they tended to be successful along the way. Yeah. So they might have failures, but it's rare that you have somebody that has spectacular failure after spectacular failure. But I'm just kind of quibbling around that. It's more like people had like modest success, but then they have something bigger, and maybe they had a failure along the way. But the press in the US can be pretty brutal on people when they have a spectacular failure. But there's a very different mindset. And this is one that, in my view, falls squarely on the founder, and it doesn't fall on the culture around it, which is the founder in the US, they have that spectacular failure. They see the press. They just laugh it off. They go, yeah, of course, yeah. They're selling papers. They move on, and they stop caring. And the difference that I've seen here is, and it's changing. I've noticed it changing over the last couple of years, but the first couple of years I came here, people were afraid of talking to the press because they were worried about getting a bad article in Stuff or the Herald or something that looked, bad about what they're doing, or it'd be like, maybe it's an investor and they've had like 20 successful companies, but then they have a couple that were like spectacular failures, and they were like, it was their fault. And my view, and the thing that I've said to founders or investors when they get that press, is just ignore it. Who cares? It just doesn't matter. Did you break the law? Did you do anything unethical? And just own it and move on and don't care. And what is happening is more and more and more people are taking that sort of mentality. But it's kind of like if you have the tall poppy doesn't have to be cut off. The tall poppy can keep growing. And I think it's taking that sort of, I really don't care what the press has to say sort of attitude, if you know you're right and you know that that's the way that it works, and that's fine.
See,
And people getting used to that is it's hard for people to take on that risk.
I have a slightly different take. I think New Zealand is a country of small businesses. I think we are okay with failing. The thing that I see perhaps, and maybe it's an observation that's with no factual evidence, but we're really good at building something and then getting there like, yeah, that's enough. Life's pretty good.
Yeah.
I could go further, but I've got my boat, my batch, and my
BMW.
house. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong. Like, I have no criticism of that.
Yeah.
But there's sort of not that aspirational. And it's not because people who go further are driven by the wealth.
Oh, don't worry. There's plenty of that in the US. Yeah. What ends up happening is when you have a new ecosystem, and this is about the tech ecosystem where you can build big company after big company after big fast growing company. Once you start to get a culture of people doing that, success breeds success breeds success. So people have looked at it and they're like, well, everybody did the 3B program, so I'm going to do the 3B program.
Yeah, true.
But culturally, that's changing pretty fast. And I'm seeing it even in the just 4 or 5 years that I've been spending a lot of time with New Zealand. The people that are having successes are much more aggressively coming back and investing in other companies and starting new companies and doing that sort of thing. And there are a few high profile people that I admire that they really went on the 3B program. And I'm not going to name them, but I mean, I think we all know who some of those people are. They've earned the right to do that. To grow an ecosystem, it's more Pete Becks that make the difference. And then there are other people who are quietly doing that sort of thing. I think of Fatty Majriki as one of those people. He started a company called Power by Proxy. So, every iPhone that's out there today has his technology in it from University of Auckland that he did with his co-founder, acquired by Apple.
I used to walk past on my way to work, and I was reading about it in the media and going, there's some amazing stuff happening in that building. I could feel it.
But Fatty is full-time at Apple, travels all over the world for Apple. And at the same time, he's actively investing and working with founders here. And it's that sort of engagement and drive that really moves an ecosystem forward. And I think, to be fair, now there's more critical mass. So if you've started a company and you have a successful outcome and you raise your hand and you're willing to start to invest and do stuff and work with these companies, there's much more fertile ground to work on. So when you have somebody like Guy Horrocks, who founded a couple of successful companies, he was the first to jailbreak the iPhone. He moved to the US to build these businesses. He's a Kiwi. And now he's back living in New Zealand and getting involved with a ton of startups, joining boards, investing. That has a huge impact, but you can't do that until it gets to a certain size. So the ecosystem has reached this critical mass where people like Guy can come back, or Bowen Pan. I don't know if you've met Bowen Pan. He created Facebook Marketplace. It's a Kiwi.
He's been written up a few times in the papers here.
Yeah,
which is good, great to get him to get him back in country.
Yeah. And he's engaged. I think he joined the EdZME board, and he's involved in a whole series of things, but he is an amazing product person and really knows how to build technologies and companies. And then his wife is similarly talented and from the tech ecosystem, the tech world. So there's a real opportunity. And I think you're starting to see the diaspora of people that have been very successful in the tech industry, who are Kiwis that moved out of New Zealand, are starting to move back and get re-engaged. And that's where the AIP program, this active investor program, where you have people getting residence visas based on investing in the country is so powerful. A bunch of these people that are coming through, they're keeping a low profile. They're really successful people, and they're getting involved, they're getting engaged in the ecosystem and really starting to open up that network into the US. And I am always not surprised, very, very pleased to see that Americans love Kiwis. So being a Kiwi opens all sorts of doors. So when I talk about Kiwis in the US and how they actually talk about their company, they actually have one real advantage, which is it's easier to get their foot in the door. The question is, what do you do once you have your foot in the door?
I totally agree. When we travel a lot to the States to go and talk to other investment managers. And the response you often get is, we've been, I'd literally send an email, wouldn't know the investors. You send an email to Bridgewater or something, and their response is, well, we've been closed for 15 years. But how cool would it be to have someone from New Zealand on our guest list? Yeah. How about Thursday, 10 a.m.?
Yeah.
You're sitting there going, oh, that was the easy part, which should have been the hard part. Now I have to go talk to them and sort of spread our...
And the important thing also is not to lose the parts of Kiwi culture that matter, which is integrity and avoiding the arrogance. So you can have confidence without arrogance. And I think those two get confused all the time, the difference between the two.
And ambition. Some people, when you're sharing what you're so focused on, can construe it as one of those two as well, I've found. Do you think that you run events for people from Silicon Valley and other parts of the world to come into New Zealand and experience, I guess, the New Zealand way for a period? Tell us a little bit about those and what works and what doesn't work. And
it's something fun that I like to do, and that's to get people together in some of these events. And there are a few different things that I do during the year. But the biggest one that has really started to gather its own momentum is called Far Out. And Far Out is the name for a road trip where earlier this year, we got 100 people together to join a convoy, 20 4x4 vehicles to drive one way from Auckland down to Queenstown. And on any given leg, it was about half people from outside New Zealand. So that's both returning Kiwi expats and Americans that haven't spent much time or haven't been to New Zealand before, but are very successful and integrated into the tech ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, the growth ecosystem in the US in these cars, together with leading Kiwis, leading entrepreneurs, people that are investing, doing interesting things. And when you get in a car with somebody and you spend 4 or 5 hours a day with them for, 5 days, and you split up cars and you put a cooler of pals in the back, chili bin of pals in the back, people really get to know each other really well. So this trip, the first year we did it, it was about 15 people. Last year we had about 100. This year we're doing it again, and the interest level is off the charts. The dates are January 27th through February 4th. The website is farout.nz, and we'll have 100 people again. And this year we have Air New Zealand is a sponsor. Fantastic. And we'll be providing a charter flight. So rather than driving from Auckland, taking the ferry and going down to the South Island, we're going to fly the entire group from Auckland down to Wellington and then down to the South Island. And then we'll spend about a week driving around doing a lot of back road tracks and that sort of thing with the group.
I would love to sort of know what the outcome of all those conversations would be, because as you say, if you're in a car with someone you never met, but you're in sort of parallel universes and you're sharing ideas, and there'll be people with capital, there'll be people with new ventures.
It's been really great. The reason that this year really worked is because out of the 15 people that came the first year, about half of those people got really engaged in making the event we had earlier this year successful. So there were about 10 people that just rolled up their sleeves and opened up their Rolodexes to help on the sponsorship front, to help on the vehicle front. We know a ton of these people that have done this work, but it wouldn't have worked this year without that, because there's no formal management around this. And we got some support to do it this year.
It's like a cryptocurrency. It's decentralized.
It's definitely decentralized. Yeah. And it'll be a little more.
Maybe you could get an NFT or something.
Yeah. But the one thing that came out of it that I realized and that I've seen is the biggest problem that startups here are really starting to face is it's not really capital anymore. So if you go and you ask a founder, what's your biggest problem? They'll always tell you capital. They're always going to say that. They're always like, we don't have enough money, and maybe 1 in 100 times they won't, just because it's up and to the right and it's taking off. But even then they'll usually want to invest more. The second one, and the one that has become a much bigger problem, is talent. And that's people that know how to scale these businesses. And right now, a lot of the startups are hiring talent away from each other. And the only way to scale it is you have people that are coming out of, say, Auckland University, or coming out of AUT or Canterbury, et cetera. They're smart, but they don't have the experience. So if you can bring in really talented people from the tech ecosystem to work at these startups, people that have done it before, working side by side with, say, per person that comes in from the States, you have maybe 4 or 5 Kiwis working. Those Kiwis learn faster. Everybody wins as a result. And my belief is recruiting that talent is equally important to recruiting capital. And that, as the ecosystem continues to grow, is going to become a bigger and bigger problem.
Very cool.
We could talk a long time about the visas that you're talking about. Do you think we're doing enough to solve it?
I think that the government, and I think that when I say that, I mean the New Zealand government, not necessarily just the parties that are there, are being very thoughtful about this right now. And I think there is an awareness that if you take a look at some of the waves of mass immigration that have happened in the past, that mass immigration has its own set of challenges. But when you have targeted immigration and people that come in that are very compatible with Kiwi values and can be very additive, clearly, to the economy, I think there's an excitement and enthusiasm for doing that, just making sure that there aren't any major mistakes that are made along the way. But I do feel like the parliament and government is being very thoughtful about how to do that and bring out new policies.
It's always really good to hear that. You don't often hear those words coming from a venture capitalist, that actually, government's doing a pretty good job.
No, you don't ever hear it anyway.
I would say one thing that's funny is I think people always complain about government, but I think in general, I go back to it and I just think about how well things work here relative to what I've seen in the States. And the other thing that I like to point out to people, and I think you guys will probably appreciate this, I don't think I've ever met a Kiwi that likes their local council. I'm serious. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever talked to somebody that's like, I am so lucky to have the best council. Do you know somebody that has said that?
I'm not trying to contradict you just for the sake of it.
No, it's fine. I'm good.
I have a completely different view.
But I didn't really have an opinion about Auckland Council. And then I lived in the UK. Yeah. And then, Auckland Council's good.
Okay. All right. I love it.
I can pick it because it's the New Zealand spot. You go around some of I was living in Edinburgh, you go around some of those playgrounds and parks and things, and they're disgraceful. Yeah. This is your showpiece to the population, and they're a disgrace.
Speaking of which, I lived in San Francisco for over 20 years. And it's pathetic what happened in San Francisco. As much tax money as they had to fund programs, what happened was insane.
Here's one for you. I was at
inexcusable.
A couple of months ago, I was at the playground, Western Park, between Ponsonby and Freeman's Bay in Auckland, and there were some people from overseas. I didn't catch where they were, but I think they were American but living in Hong Kong. And the father, the kids are all playing on the slides, he said to me, I cannot believe that someone isn't charging for this playground. And he was like, to him, it was just completely foreign. And that there wasn't tagging everywhere, that there were slides that were functioning.
Well, I mean, this is a small thing. I've driven all over the country, all over New Zealand, and really all over. And the public restrooms, the public toilets are well kept.
Yeah, they're not terrible, are they?
It's
You go to a Glasgow public toilet.
but my point being that on balance, compared to most of the OECD, let alone the rest of the world, it's really remarkable how efficient government is here.
I think it was Ronald Reagan, because I was just listening to a podcast about him randomly by Anthony Scaramucci, but he said government's not the solution. Government's often the problem, and actually it's us that can fix all this stuff.
Yeah, and ultimately, with Far Out, which I was talking about before, my hope for Far Out is we've a group of us have put together this not-for-profit entity called the Far Out Foundation. And the Far Out Foundation, the mission is to recruit the best and the brightest to live and work in New Zealand at high growth companies. And we want to have a lot of partners in this, but we want to never raise money from government. So we want to find a way to make the model work outside of government support. And rather than complaining about government or government should be doing this, is there a way to build a coalition of the people that benefit from it directly to actually solve the problems as opposed to complain about the problems? And my sense is Kiwis are more than happy to do that. It's just, we have to do it.
Yeah, you've got to make it happen. Rob, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really, really great conversation. And,
Thanks.
I'm looking forward to seeing and learning more about Far Out.
Yeah.
And I hope to, see all the new people coming from abroad and hearing their stories in time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
New Zealand Funds Management Limited is the issuer of the NZ Funds Active Income Series, NZ Funds Active Inflation Series and NZ Funds Active Growth Series, together the NZ Funds Active Series, as well as the NZ Funds Kiwi Saver Scheme, the NZ Funds Managed Superannuation Service, NZ Funds Wealth Builder and NZ Funds Income Generator. For further information or to request a copy of the product disclosure statement for each of these, please contact NZ Funds or visit nzfunds.co.nz. This recording is provided for information purposes only. The information provided is not intended as a substitute for specific professional advice on investments, financial planning, or any other matter. Past performance is not an indication of future returns.